Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us here at a very special talk show that we organized and took quite some time in the making. I think we've been in talks with the Boiler Room team, Boiler Room crew for around 5 months. Just from the start of the first lockdown period here in Jakarta, we had discussions with Blaze, and then finally we got in touch with Michail, and fortunately and very happy that finally this talk show is happening right now, just at the second phase of the lockdown that we're experiencing again here in Jakarta. So firstly, let me introduce myself. I'm Hendy Kana, a DJ and also co-founder of Tripo 3000, an event organizer based here in Jakarta. Some of you might know us at Tripo 3000. Other than making parties, we also try to connect, support communities all over Indonesia. We did an incubator program last year in multiple cities all around to support and help music communities and also DJs. Well, hopefully this year we can connect with more communities and more cities, and with events, especially like this one as an example. So last year we did mostly offline events, but since COVID, of course, we need to adapt and find new ways to connect. That's why one of the reasons we're doing this talk show today is to support and boost morale of all the music industry and communities around Indonesia. So maybe I'll just quickly introduce the participants here from all over. We've got plenty of artists, communities, management, media, venue owners, all around. We got from Jakarta, Bandung, Semarang, Bali, Yogyakarta, Malang, well, pretty much across Indonesia. And very surprisingly, we also got some participants joining us from overseas. We got some participants coming up from Cologne and also from Brisbane in Australia. So very happy to hear that, because I think everyone here is keen to listen, ask, and discuss about the main topic that we're going to discuss today, which is how to survive, save, sustain in our industry in these tough times. So hearing and discussing directly to one of the key persons involved in some of the biggest names in underground music culture, such as Boiler Room, CTM Festival, running his own night at Berghain, would be very uplifting and encouraging for all of us now. So we're very lucky to have Michail Stangl here today with us. Thank you for joining us, man.
Someone deactivated my microphone, but now I'm back.
Yeah, so thank you.
I didn't even say anything yet.
So thank you once again for joining us, man. And most of us would definitely know you as one of the key faces and hosts of Boiler Room, but you've got many other roles in the scene. So would you kindly tell us a bit more about yourself and your roles for the underground music culture?
Yeah, of course. Thank you once again for the invitation, just because, funny enough, this week is my 2-year anniversary of having traveled for the very first time to Indonesia, to Yogyakarta, which was in all of my travels that I've done for music over the last 15 years or so, one of the most amazing experiences. And I'm not just saying that, you know, like a rock band that is like, good evening, Jakarta, you know, genuinely what I experienced in the roughly 10 days that we've spent in Yogyakarta as part of the Nusa Sonic Festival, still continues on as a source of inspiration, friendship, projects, and it's just enriching my personal life as a music fan. So it's a very good time to relive some of those pretty wild memories, to be honest, but we may talk about that later. So, I mean, as of me, as a little bit about my background and how I got, you know, where I am is, to be honest, they're very random, to say the least. I originally come from Russia, from Moscow. I was born in Moscow and came in the 90s to Germany, you know, after the Soviet Union fell apart, perestroika. You know, my family wanted, you know, out of a very uncertain political situation. So I ended up in West Germany, in the 90s, not far away from a city called Frankfurt. Frankfurt, that center, Germany, was in the 90s basically the cradle of German electronic music. I mean, the story is a little bit more complex than that, but, things like trance, GABA, hard techno, all of those things, kind of came from a cluster of producers and activists in Frankfurt. And through my close proximity, especially through radio in the area, I got very young, very involved with electronic music as a fan. Funny enough, the second CD that I ever bought, and I hope some of the participants are young enough to remember CDs, old enough to remember CDs, was Thunderdome 4, which is a GABA compilation. So, like from very early age, I was more interested in the kind of fringe, extreme ways of music. And one of the things that I've kind of realized at some point was the red thread through my own personal history, but listening history, also my interest as a music professional is through coming to Germany, not having much context for Western culture until I was like 9 years old. I got very quickly very fascinated by new forms, because everything when I came at that point, was continuously new. No matter TV, music, whatever, culture, all was new. So that is like up to this point my obsession. Art forms, mostly music that is shifting, changing, taking new forms. In the moment something has a shape, let's say a genre gets a name and becomes self-referential, meaning producers of a genre have other producers of that genre as their reference point, then it's self-contained, then this is already where I want to move on. So I think those two things are very, very closely connected. Anyhow, was I was with music as much as one could be, with much without having much access to record stores or the internet. Luckily saved my life. But ultimately in 2005 I decided to move to Berlin, not because I had any professional ambitions, but because I saw a poster of an event taking place in Berlin that had every artist that at that time I loved. I was in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, I was big time into a music genre called breakcore. Some of you might know what that is. This is like, artists like Venetian Snares, like FX Twin, but more fucked up, basically. And that was happening in Berlin, and I thought, if this is happening in Berlin without actually ever having been in Berlin really before, I decided to move there. I abandoned my plans to become a theater actor and moved with no plan whatsoever to Berlin and dove in immediately into the underground music scene. And underground music scene, and club culture before that was quite important for me already, because growing up as an immigrant in a part of Germany that unfortunately was populated by extreme far-right extremists. Like, if you remember, or if you know much about, the 90s in Europe, there used to be baseball bat swinging skinheads, that would hunt down anyone who was not, German. And that was basically the majority of my youth. And electronic music and club culture in particular didn't give me, escapism. It gave me a framework, both ideologically, socially, a safe space, so to say, to just, be a weird kid that's into, goth and industrial and drum and bass and, has political opinions that don't match the conservative surroundings that I grew up in, So when I came to Berlin, this was that, but cranked up on 11, because Berlin, by 2005, was already, 15 years into its history of being one of the major places for underground music culture. So I got, to Berlin, and funny enough, only a few years later, I realized that the event that I saw and that made me basically move to Berlin was a CTM Festival organized event. But it was still years until I got involved with CTM Festival professionally. But ultimately, I got into Berlin, realized that the music that I was really into, which was a mixture between, breakcore and dubstep. Dubstep was at that time, coming up. Berlin was one of the very first cities outside of London, that had a interest in dubstep and interest in grime, you know, people started to organize small events. One of the first ones was a party called Grime Time, organized by a young woman called Sasha Pereira, who used to be the singer of a band called Jacuzzi. She's still making music, you know. She brought this sound over to Berlin, or a DJ duo like Sick Girls, who were, you know, the early, you know, bass music ambassadors in Berlin. So I started, you know, to do my own thing, you know, small parties that kind of worked out, sometimes didn't work out, most of it paid by the student loan that I got from the government to study. I was studying sociology, but, you know, I would spend a little bit money on a falafel, and the rest, you know, would basically go into my parties. And slowly, you know, that gained momentum. You know, one party became quite successful. It moved, you know, to the next venue, then to a bigger venue. Then I started to do things in multiple venues, parallel. So at some point I had basically a party each weekend in different clubs, but everything always focused on electronic music, mostly dance music, but nothing that was house and techno really, because that was never really my interest. I always, you know, I'm interested in emerging forms. And so, to cut a long story short, you know, I became basically a professional fanboy. You know, it's what I think many of you do. You know, this is, you are part of a community. You know, you are part of a circle of friends, you know, who do have a particular taste in music, or you do know that there's, you know, a circle around you that will appreciate something that's just not present in your community. So being the person with the most skills to organize stuff, hopefully, you know, you just go in and you start to organize, you know, and you make up things along the way. Of course, there are multiple ways, you know, to approach a career in music industry, and all of you will know that. Some, you know, go a professional route, you know, studying media law or production, you know, or business management with a focus on the events sector. For me, this was, to be honest, all self-taught experimentation, and I ended up being, in some aspects of it, quite good, frankly speaking. You know, not all of it, you know, but I've never made too much money with my events, you know, but always enough that I could prepay for the next one, you know.
Yep.
So this was I think quite good. And I did, you know, a few things that nowadays are not that common. You know, I worked in a record store. I personally always say I do not trust anyone in the music industry who did not start in a record store, because if you know, spend the time with the physical object, and again, you know, I'm not romanticizing vinyl, you know, frankly speaking, you know, if everyone decides it's impractical, it's expensive, you know, it depends on outdated logistics, you know, so I do not judge, you know, anyone who does not care for vinyl, you know, but, you know, working a couple of years in a record store with the physicality of the object, you know, with the connection, with the DJs, with the promoters, you know, being able to explain music, you know, that was very, very important. And also some of my most important connections, amongst other, my entryway into Berghain as a promoter happened through the record store, because I happened to recommend one of the bookers of the club music that he, you know, didn't know that he would like. You know, he was into metal. You know, I'm massively into metal, which is one of the things what I enjoyed about Jakarta so much. You know, I'm really into black metal and kind of all sorts of like progressive death metal and weird shit, drone doom. So, you know, through the combination of knowing electronic music and metal, you know, I had conversations with the right people. And then, you know, by that time, I was running a couple of like really, really influential parties in Berlin. And then in my periphery of sight, a online podcast show video thing popped up called Boiler Room out of London. You know, at that time I was the person that would probably bring the most British talent, new British talent, over to Berlin. And this was, I mean, we're talking, I do not know, you know, the age bracket of the participants, but we're talking 2010. This is before, I think this is before Facebook had a like button. You know, this was when people still had MySpace profiles. This was before Twitter and Instagram, you know, were even, you know, remotely as relevant. I think Instagram wasn't even existing by then, you know. So we are talking the early days of the so-called Web 2.0. And one thing that I found striking about Boiler Room at that time, not knowing who those guys were, was that they were showing the kind of stuff that was happening in London that I knew was the most cutting edge sound coming out of London, meaning that they knew what their city was about. And one of the issues at that time in Berlin was that Berlin was stuck in a narrative about Berlin between, a club called Bar 25. Some of you might have heard of it. It was like the peak hedonistic, after hour club. This is like the kind of venue where you go in on a Thursday and you get spat out on a Monday morning, with no money, with no memory of what happened. Yeah. But the music, in those venues was the absolute opposite of what I thought was, Berlin about. Because Berlin is about, Berlin is a city that through its socioeconomic history, especially reunification, which today, is the 30th anniversary of, that, reunification and the destabilization that came with it created a lot of space and a lack of oversight from the government, which is something we probably will speak about later. So, which means there was a lot of room and not enough policemen to make sure that people don't do shit that's forbidden. That's ultimately the story of Berlin. That allowed, for clubs to register a cafe and a gallery, but operate 5,000 square meters of techno warehouse raves. Because nobody would ever really come and check on it. It's not as easy as that, but, in a certain extent it was, So that also created enough space for people to come in, and spend time in Berlin, leaving things behind. So Berlin as a city is really, really bad at creating own new things. I think like the last relevant musical innovation from Berlin was probably the Einstürzende Neubauten, which is an industrial band from the early 80s. Maybe dub techno, which is the early 90s, but beyond that, Berlin is not about, creating particularly good at creating new things. Berlin is really good at providing space for ideas to come together, because for a long time you were able to exist in the city with not that much pressure. When I came to Berlin 15 years ago, the room that I rented in a shared apartment was 120 euros, for that. This is like for anywhere in Europe, not much money to be able, to live okay as a student. You could live with 500 euros a month. You could live a normal life, and which is amazing. So you could focus on doing creative stuff, and not slaving away in like some dead end job, thinking about, how do I make ends meet. Yeah. So, and this is the perception of Berlin was limited to, this funny after hour tech house, not the wild shit that was actually happening. So seeing that Boiler Room, was doing that, doing an online radio show, a video show of music that I thought was relevant, I understood that this is something we can do for the city as well. We can portray the city actually the way it's happening, documenting it as it happens, rather than relying on misinformed journalists to tell a story about a city that is simply speaking not true. Because 90% of the people that I was hanging out, that I admired and that I saw, doing tremendously creative things, they would not, have those places as their center, of life. They would maybe, you go there on a Sunday because there's nothing else to do, but ultimately you saw the limitations of that, hedonistic, very uniform 123 BPM tech house that basically only exists because it does not ask anything from you. If the music is only 123 BPM, you can go on for 48 hours because there's no, there are no peaks. It does not, you never exhaust yourself, but which is, something that I find interesting in music that demands the utmost of you, which is why, by the way, I love Gabba Modus Operandi, just because, once they are done, whoever plays after them is fucked, and you are fucked as well because you'll be exhausted. But long story short, took quite a while, to get things organized, just because, Boiler Room at that time didn't have a web page, didn't have money. It was 3 people, with a webcam. So it took us nearly a year, to figure out how do we gonna do it. I still have in my office here next door the original webcams that I bought secondhand on eBay and picked up myself because we didn't have money for new web cameras.
Yeah.
Um, and the 21st of August 2011, we did the first Boiler Room Berlin show, which was the first Boiler Room show outside of London, which was funny enough the first Boiler Room show actually happening in a boiler room, because not far away from where I live here in Berlin, which is the north of the city, used to be an abandoned swimming pool, which friends of mine turned into an illegal club. And I could tell you a long story about how I once did an illegal rave with Moby headlining, which is the basically foundation of Boiler Room, if you want, but that would take 5 more minutes. Or we can skip forward to that. I found that Boiler Room, and we organized, the first show, and from there on, you can basically track, the history of it by the
Yeah.
videos, which was basically, and this is ultimately, what my work at Boiler Room was informed by for 9.5 years, is to make the connections
Yeah.
between various communities visible. What's happening in London is relevant to people in Berlin. What's happening in Berlin is relevant to the kids in Jakarta, who probably will never be able to participate because, this is,
Yeah.
something that's very important for me, that people understand. Access to club culture is very often
Yeah.
defined by privilege, by
Yeah.
basically multiple privileges. One is monetary privilege. You do have to have the money to go and party. It's geographic privilege. You
Yeah.
need to live somewhere where this stuff is happening. And it's also socioeconomic privilege. You gotta look the way to participate, which are all 3 things that I find problematic, to say the least. But because before, I was a hip DJ, I would not get into half of the clubs in Berlin,
Yeah.
because who
Yeah.
am I? Like, I'm a fucking chubby nerd with an awkward style, so they would say, no, not tonight.
Yeah.
And the big chance of Boiler Room wasn't because, I grew up living culture through the internet, small town punk in the middle of fuck nowhere. I know what it means to participate remotely in things that are important to you. And this is, the argument that we've always made for Boiler Room, is that even though club culture is a safe space that is created for a certain kind of community, um, there's still an argument to be made to share it open and democratically with as many people as possible. Because why is a kid that lives somewhere where they can't get out but is as passionate about the music, maybe even more passionate than most Berlin, party goers, not allowed to participate? So, through this mediated experience, we managed to create this participation, a very abstract form of participation, but participation nonetheless. And we grew this, Berlin first, then Paris,
Yeah.
then Madrid, then Moscow, then Beijing, then Sao Paulo, then Johannesburg, and so forth and so on. And that ultimately, that idea of providing a platform for music that doesn't have a platform, and the opportunities that come with it, is what all of my work is ultimately driven by, including CTM Festival, which you've mentioned.
Yep.
CTM Festival is one of the world's oldest and biggest festivals for experimental music, avant-garde music, and new forms of, electronic music. And again, the festival, which I joined as one of the co-curators about a decade ago, is exactly that. This is not a festival, where we just book whatever's cool and sells tickets. It's a festival that understands itself as a platform. We do have the venues, we do have the funding, we do have the connections to make sure, that we allow as many people as possible globally to participate and utilize the festival as a platform, which is also one of the reasons why we have now, very long-standing collaboration and relationship with many cultural activists in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and across all Southeast Asia, in East Africa, and so forth and so on. So ultimately, to wrap everything up, for me, not only electronic music, but club music or underground music is a social space, a political space first, and then entertainment. And this is, how I operate, and what I think most of everyone, who wants to work in this field, should behave themselves. You do this because you create a social space, you create political context for the culture and the society, you operate in, and then you're having fun while doing so, but the fun should never be, more important than the other two things.
Yep. Agree. Well, thank you very much for the thorough introduction. Pretty much covered everything that I think the participants here would like to know about how you started everything, how about you, like the turning point for yourself to be highly committed in the music industry, and then the boiler room part, the CTM part. So thank you very much for the introduction. And then, yes, there's going to be a lot of topics that you mentioned earlier that we're going to discuss further on through the next segments. So I think we can go forward to the next part. So maybe before we start, I'll just explain a little bit how we're going to try to do this talk show and keep it interactive for everyone involved today. So we've got plenty of interesting questions from all over the participants joining here with us, and I'll try to include them within each segment. So I'm going to include the questions from the participants, and then maybe we can have a quick open discussion from who asked the particular question. So now let's talk about the key topics today. Obviously, the first thing to do in any tough situation that we're currently having right now globally, also here in Indonesia, is how to survive. So obviously, the COVID situation has started earlier in Europe compared to us. I think in Germany itself, the first COVID announcement was, I think, around end of January. So it was way earlier than when it happened over here in Indonesia, where it was around March. So in terms of the electronic music scene, are you guys over there still in survival mode, or are you guys already getting back to a somewhat new kind of normal situation?
One of the things that I personally think is key to understand when you talk, about the time before COVID and post-COVID is the notion of normality. I do believe, that what we perceive is, or was, some sort of state of normality was dysfunctional in the first place, So when we look into the future, into, what is music industry, music culture going forward, we do have to make sure that we do not return to the unsustainable and destructive patterns of the past. So whenever people tell me, "Oh, I can't wait until it's back to normal," I, to be honest, do not want that things return to normal. I do not want a music industry that relies, rather than building equity within their community, relies on cheap airplane tickets, to feed a ever-growing entertainment machine, that is focused on short-term needs of an audience that want to be entertained, rather than on building, income, equity, culture, So this is like a key ideological, I think, foundation of how you look at the current situation. So Europe right now, Berlin in particular, is, and this is not different to anywhere else. The only thing anywhere else in the world, the only thing that we do have here is, Eurocentric privileges that mostly are rooted, in financial wealth. what's happening right now is a devastating blow
Yeah.
to every single aspect of underground music culture, because
Yeah. Yeah.
the last decade, that was growth, but then you look at what was actually growing, has been unsustainable in a way that the clubs, the communities, the musicians, they were not able really, to create something, long lasting. Most of the musicians and also in Europe, uh, live more or less from hand to mouth. So there's like one statistic: a freelance musician in Germany, on average, makes 12, roughly about 12,000 euros a month. Not a month, a year,
Yeah.
a year, which is, if you take into account that in Germany, the amount of money you need to make before the government actually starts to tax you is 17,000 euros a year, So they make basically less money than the government would tax them. It's an indicator for how unsustainable and fragile the situation was in the first place. And all of this is now gone. And it's not, anywhere changing in the foreseeable future. So, Berlin is luckily, I mean, you can think of, the German government and how they handled the situation, what you want, but nonetheless, I do think that the German government handled it better than many other governments, was informed by quite rational, science-driven decisions, which is important, versus, political ideologies, which is, what we've seen in the US, for example. But that came, unfortunately, with, how can I say, because, of the uncertain situation of musicians, not only musicians, but also, all the club workers, lighting, personnel, bar staff, anyone who works freelance in the creative industries, they fell out of the social net that, the governments would, open up for economies and for economies and industries. So even though, people try to find ways around it, socially distant events, open air events, alternative event concepts, this is all a band-aid, really, because in some countries, UK is, for example, a really good example. Frankly speaking, the Conservative government of the UK utilizes COVID-19 to do what they've wanted already, I think, since the days of Margaret Thatcher, which is to clean the inner cities of the disturbance of subversive elements, which is, underground music culture, clubs and so forth, so they can build more industry, more real estate, and not to deal, with the liberal arts sector. That is, frankly speaking, what's happening in UK, where the government tells millions and millions of people. I think the fifth biggest economy in UK, which is the entertainment sector, is that, what you're doing is not viable. You all gotta find yourself a new job, which is cynical. And even though the situation is not like that in Germany or France, the effects of it are as devastating, which means, to answer, the question is, no one has a fucking clue what's going to happen.
Yeah, because also a couple of the questions that came in also, so we got Isha, a talent manager from Semarang, asked a question as well. Is like, how does Boiler Room, how does CTM handle the situation right now to survive?
So, with Boiler Room, actually, in the beginning of the year, I decided, to do something new with my life, because I've been doing Boiler Room for 10 years, and even though I really, really like to, build a platform, I think the music economy has changed so significantly over the last few years that there are new ways, to build platforms. So I got really interested in that. So, I decided to do this right before COVID hit. So Boiler Room right now, being a company that relies on live events, finds themselves also in a situation where, as a media company, that's been always the challenge of the company is, the part that we're known for, the live broadcast, that doesn't make the money because nobody's paying for it. The audiences are not willing to pay for it. YouTube is not willing to pay for it, which means Boiler Room paid for it and had to make money through advertising and other means. So I think what Boiler Room will face is like many companies in the arts and entertainment sectors find a new business model, really. Finding a way.
Just a bit of pivot,
Yeah, there will be a pivot because events are not going to come back anytime soon. You can't sell tickets to events, so you will have to figure out something new. And I can't currently say what this will be because nobody knows. But I hope the platform survives because ultimately it has always had the tremendous potential of highlighting music that, frankly speaking, nobody else cared about. And with CTM Festival, we're in a similar situation because currently, the amount of people that you can get into venues is financially not viable. To do a concert in a 1,000 capacity venue with 150 people while having the same costs makes no sense. It makes no sense financially. It makes no sense in any logistically. So even with CTM Festival, of course we've done online events, amongst others with the Indonesian crew Club Matryoshka, which you might know. We've done an incredible online event with those guys. But those are again fun, but only work because we've had some funding, to pay everyone. Correct. We didn't make any money ourselves, and you can't continue to do that. So this is one thing, but ultimately, what's very important is, and I think what the city of Berlin does kind of well is they do acknowledge that the creative industries and the nightlife industry is a significant value driver for local economies. So they treat it to a certain extent, the way they would treat the manufacturing industries, which means is why, for example, today the city of Berlin, I think, provided 40 venues with 10 or 15,000 euros each for producing events, so they can both pay themselves and pay artists and at least keep the motivation going that we might be able to overcome this.
Because Berlin, Amsterdam, like all those cities that are thriving because of the support of the government is like, I think is like a special case, and hopefully other countries or other cities could experience the same thing. Well, over here in Indonesia, we're not at that at that point yet, but we'll see how it goes. But
I mean, for any participant here who's interested into looking into that, there's a organization that started operating out of Berlin that's called the Creative Footprint, which is a economical analysis of the financial impact of the nightlife industries on cities. So they do very thorough analysis, of what actually does, nightlife contribute to a city beyond taxes. They've done analysis like that for Berlin, New York, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, and I can only recommend if you're interested in economy or you might be involved with conversations with local city councils, something like that. The Creative Footprint is a very, very amazing tool set to understand a bit more systemic, complex correlations within that.
Yep, cool. I think we'll definitely be able to look into that just as a point of reference. And also coming back, like you said, you're doing the online event like the Club Matryoshka, which it's very, very pretty much it's been talked about around here as well. But then you also mentioned that you need funding and also just keep it to be able to survive and etc. So a lot of our friends here are also asking a similar question, like Chico, a producer from Solo. We got Myra Kala, a DJ from Bali. Sadam, Mustang, and Gui from Jakarta. And they're also just asking, pretty much, if I can summarize, like any idea on how to make a live streaming more interesting but also sustaining? Because like pretty much like everyone here, I think has done some sort of live streaming to survive, right?
Yeah.
With right now, but what would you recommend, or maybe you've have had any ideas just to keep it interesting yet also sustaining?
Yeah. Well, that is a trick question.
Yeah, because like I summarize a lot of
No, no,
the
no. It's a
participants here,
trick
like just
question.
yeah,
It's a trick question in this regard that, one of the biggest issues that we are facing right now is that the platforms that the platforms that we require to be present on, or, to reach audiences through, they do not work in the interest of musicians. They treat music as a scalable commodity that, can be cranked up or cranked down, but mostly are interested. The focus of those platforms are their shareholders, not the musicians. That is like a big issue. So Facebook, is not interested in driving revenue to musicians. YouTube is not interested really in, they interested in creators, because you guys are the ones who bring, new audiences to the platform so they can sell them, I don't know, cigarettes and yogurt,
yeah,
but they're not
yeah,
interested in your music. Twitch doesn't even pay license fees.
yeah,
TikTok doesn't pay anything at all. They don't fucking care about music. They just want as many like
content, yeah,
kids making stupid content, which then fucks with the brain of the creator,
yeah,
that this is what I have to be, this is what I have, to
yeah,
provide, this is, how I prove my worth to the world.
yeah,
So just from a technological perspective, there are tons of platforms that allow you to do streaming. From a
yeah,
legal perspective, as far as I know, currently Mixcloud, and they are with the video streaming only in a beta phase, is the only one that actually has the legal framework, to to offer live streams, because they pay licensing fees, they can't be muted. You know yourself, Facebook announced that they are not going to to really accept any live streaming anymore of unlicensed material. So this is
yeah,
going to go bust. So the
yeah,
drive towards live streaming, especially when it happened,
yeah,
was a necessity, because we were sitting around, we had nothing to do. It's the only way to connect to the audiences for us. But
yeah,
unfortunately, it's unsustainable unless you know you own the rights. If you're a creator, in terms of like you are a
yeah,
musician, you play live music, then the situation is a little bit different, and you can build a career
yeah,
or
yeah,
an income stream around that. For DJs, as shitty as it sounds, this is right now a really, really bad time.
yeah,
Just because, and again, we're talking about, what was perceived normal. In my opinion, the fact that a DJ, can spend 30 euros on music, or maybe nothing at all, because some people, they just go and download it on SoulSeek, and then they play
yeah,
it. But
yeah,
nonetheless, the fact that you can spend, 30 euros on music, buying 30 tracks, and then you play a festival and you get 3,000,
2000,
30,000,
yeah, yeah,
300,000 paid for that. That
yeah,
was already fucked up in the first place,
yeah,
just the importance of a DJ as a creator of value for themselves, I found highly problematic. I do not discredit the art of the DJing. A DJ can be life changing. I've experienced moments where people played music, or I, was lucky enough to have played music where afterwards somebody comes to you, or you come to the DJ and you're like, yo, this changed my life. There's a
yeah,
book called Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, which is the history
yeah,
of DJing, which I can recommend anyone to read.
yes,
You know,
right,
this is incredibly important. But the way, we were building a business model around them, and I, was a DJ as well until March, and I do not think that I'll be able to return to that job. That was unfair, DJs have more, in my opinion, a role as social glue, more than being allowed to demand I can make a living. So to answer the question, how to make live streams more interesting, I mean, ultimately one of the things that is my biggest criticism is that 90% of the streams that you see nowadays are just visually so uninteresting. It doesn't take, much to, you basically need the one person in your circle of friends who knows how to hold a camera, the one person in your circle of friends who is a good photographer and has a good eye, and then you can think about staging, and then you'll be already ahead of 80% of what the things that I've seen. This was my biggest criticism. So right now, there's not many tricks, because ultimately, as the platforms don't allow you to do the things that you do. I mean, it might be in Indonesia you have, I know in China you have different platforms, where you can stream and nobody really cares about it. So maybe, Twitch, YouTube are not the ones, but you have something local that you can utilize. But if you want to be a content creator, think like a content creator, which means tutorials first, filming second. And that's the mistake that most people do. They slap a web camera in an awkward angle, and then they think, yo, this is it, I'll be a star tomorrow. No, that's not how it works. It's content, it's TV, it's long form content. So but the answer is a bit more complicated than that, and I'm sorry that I'm talking so much, but so
No,
ultimately,
yeah.
ultimately, one thing that happened with COVID is artists had until COVID basically one key tool that they could scale and strategize easily, and that was live performances, because recorded music doesn't pay, not all of us can, have deals with brands and TV shows.
Yeah.
So not all of us can be, an influencer, So live gigs was the one thing you had to have control over, which means you could strategize. You could say, I have this thing going on, an album, so I play a couple of gigs here, then I make sure that I have a big gig around the release of the album, and I could strategize. And the only thing you needed was ideally a booking agent, and most people could do it themselves, really. You don't need really a booking agent if you, diligent. But this now collapsed. There are no live gigs anymore. And in return, we have now 5 new platforms that all come with their own sets that musicians have to contextualize. If you want to go on Twitch, what is the story that I'm going to tell? If I'm going on TikTok, what is this that my audience wants to see? If I'm on Instagram, shit, I have to be a good photographer. If I gonna say, Bandcamp, then I'll need to be able, I can't sit in the studio for 4 years until my Magnus Opum is done. I have to churn out a banger every fucking Friday, which means that the demand from artists now multiplied 5 times, but for all of those 5 things, there are no viable strategies yet, which means it became harder, it became harder to be a musician.
So Myra, I mean, like one of your questions, Myra, we got joining us from Bali, and also Saram from Jakarta. So that was pretty much the insight from Michail that well, there is no answer to to do this streaming to be sustaining and everything. Do you have anything you want to add on, Myra?
I think no.
Yeah, I'll hope.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a depressing answer, but ultimately,
Yeah, but it's the reality that we're facing. Yeah, that, like we all facing that. So yeah, it's a good answer though. Thank you, Michail.
But ultimately, I do think that creativity is what wins. the thing is like, because there's a million DJs, which means that there are now a million people facing the same issue, you do have to, rather than sitting, you know, on Instagram looking at the gigs that were amazing last year, this is past, you know, this is not going to be like that. Think about what is it that I can do differently, and even if it means to start a band, because that means you'll get completely different tools of expression and a completely different control over you know what you do. And maybe, you know, COVID means that we're gonna be in 10 years, you know, not at raves but at grunge concerts again, because everybody started, you know, to listen to guitar music. You know, such evolution of things.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So nice segment about surviving, and now maybe we can go to the next phase, which is the saving mode. What can we do to save everything that we've built for our industry? So maybe talking about saving from a cultural perspective. Now everything is pretty much online, as we know, especially here in Indonesia. Often we look up to the Western world as a source of inspiration for almost everything. But surely we must also save our own culture, right? So, Michail, from your own experience, what would you say is the pros and cons regarding this?
Well, ultimately, what's going to happen now is also, if, you know, we return to some sort of live industry focused economy, because, you know, of the collapse of many venues, you know, a lot of infrastructure, you know, what will happen is that there will be, well, I think, you know, I'm not an economist, you know, but that's my gut feeling. There's going to be a squashing, which means the top talent, which doesn't need the money but wants the attention, you know, will drop their fees and go down, you know, which means that they will populate the same field that the middle tier talent was populating, you know. So all of a sudden you will have more competition for less amount of money, which means everyone, you know, below this mid tier, like up and coming artists, you know, people who maybe don't have professional representation, will get squashed out to the sides and to the bottom, which means that the only way to survival for us is to build our own self-sustained economies and communities, which means that you have to rely even on, you know, who are the people around you, what can you do with them, for them, and make sure that that money stays within your circle, you know. Build equity for your own community, which means, you know, that can be your party crew, this can be your city, this can be your country, you know. But ultimately, and this is not, you know, my call to arms, you know, like, don't let those Westerners take away your gigs, even though fuck them, you know, most of them don't deserve the attention, you know, and the money that are being given to them. But think about your community first and share as little of that wealth as possible. And Bali is, for example, a really good example for that. I've not been to Bali. I was actually supposed to come in December to Bali to hang out, amongst others, with Myra and with, you know, the GMO guys. Couldn't go because I had an accident, but I still hope to come. But Bali is very often cited for me as an example of exactly that, you know, more or less that kind of imperialism. You know, people come in, build clubs for their, you know, Australian promoters, for Australian DJs, for Australian audiences, and the local community that has to contribute 1,000 times more is being left out. So now, you know, the most important thing is to turn the shit around and do it for yourself, because, you know, else they will not share their wealth, you know. And this is also, you know, what we need, you know, to do as cultural activists across borders is to dismantle those systems, those imperialist, you know, system of powers that ultimately center everything, you know, around Europe and Anglo-American, you know, economies. And the only way you can do that is to unlearn those patterns, you know, literally unlearn. Like when you said, well, we look towards the West, what is, you know, how does music industry operate? You know, the West taught themselves a lot of like really, really toxic, abusive, you know, strategies. So you got to unlearn this shit first and build something that makes sense within the context of your own community. And again, you know, it's hard for me to answer because it really depends on what is the income, you know, how much are people willing to pay for music, which I, you know, as understood in Indonesia, is not as much, which is why every event is sponsored by a cigarette company, which is fucked up in the first place. But the more, you know, you educate your audience, you show, you know, you show them that this is, you know, something that we built together, you know, your participation, you know, creates experiences, creates things that actually matter in your life, which is music, you know, which is people you might find inspiring. The easier it will get. I mean, basically right now we have the chance and the challenge to start completely anew, and this, you know, new world has to be focused on local communities, you know,
that's because
ultimately
very relevant regarding that, because that's also I think what's happening here as well, Michail, because like we have a comment also from Obi, a DJ from Interrupted Jakarta, that asking how can we shape and change the norm for people to be more appreciative towards local talents, because here in Indonesia it's still heavily Western or like, you know, overseas talents that are like appreciated more. How can we change the norm so it'll be just as equal as appreciation for the international talents for the local DJs? So
I think again, you know, unlearning and proactively putting a focus, you know, whenever you think about a thing that's exciting from the West, you know, stop and think about something equally exciting from your community and put that first, you know. Get, you know, the, you know, it's I mean, it's a sort of decolonization, more or less, you know, in language and action, you know. And I know it's a bit cynical that like a middle-aged white guy is like talking about decolonization from Berlin, but ultimately it's a reality, you know. This is the only thing, you know, like people that look like me, you know, have done a lot of harm to music economies. So focus on the talent, you know, like if the people around you start only to see excellence from within the community, they will start to appreciate it, you know. But if you focus, you know, you ignore yourself the excellence that is within your community, and you know, and you amplify narratives that have nothing to do with what's happening around you, then you can't also expect people, you know, to break through those patterns themselves. It's seriously, this is a mixture between grassroots activism and PR. That's like that's a mixture of those two things, you know.
Obi, would you like to add something regarding that? And maybe you can unmute Obi.
Hey Michail, thanks for your response, man. Well, that is one side of the situation. Yeah, I mean that's it does sound bitter, and again, that is the reality of it. But then again, could it be? Is it because there's not much labels being active here? Is it like there's not much producing going on here as well? That's why maybe the DJs might not be considered as special as the DJs from the international side of the world, that they would actually like, you know, in my opinion, you have an extra value when you have your own track, your own work, you know. Maybe that hasn't been happening much, and hopefully I'm wrong, but then like do you think that actually could help?
Yeah, of course. I mean, ultimately, you know, you do have to again, I personally think that the DJ is very much overrated as a creator,
Yeah.
and very often, producers end up being DJs because the music is not appreciated enough, and DJing is an easier way to make money. But nonetheless, it is, and it's also not true. There's a huge amount, of labels. What's not there is the platforms that aggregate the knowledge about them, because the Western publications, they don't write much about what's happening in Southeast Asia. Even the platforms in Southeast Asia don't write enough about, what's happening in Southeast Asia, which is
Right.
one of the outcomes that we've had 2 years ago during Nusa Sonic, that there was not that much internal, exchange. So again, you have to, and this is hard because, unless you'll manage to do, a congress of underground music producers of this, Southeast Asia, and you decide on one, like some socialist action, you decide on one platform for all, it will be experimentation. Some people might start a blog, somebody media savvy might start, a media platform that is easier to scale, but ultimately this needs to happen. So, there are places to go where you can find this kind of stuff. And a lot of it will only be possible if people are willing to exploit themselves for the love of music. Like when I was, a student, I did it because I loved it and not because, my parents thought it was a good idea to make a living, which they, frankly speaking, did not, So, which I think is a story that most of you share, But ultimately, producing is key. Producing, not looking up, again, when I said, with the moment stuff gets self-referential, if you think you want to do techno, and the only references you have is techno that was created by people who only have techno as their reference, how are you going to be more interesting than any of the people that came before you?
That's true.
Which is when people start to make music just because, and they might have an idea of, I've never listened to drum bass, but then I've heard the beat and I'll just do my own version. All of a sudden the most revolutionary things can come out of that, and again, I'm obviously a fanboy, and I do think they're one of the most amazing things I've heard in the last decade or so. Gabba Modus Operandi is a really good example for that, because it's everything but Gabba, really. But everyone who loves Gabba thinks this is the wild.
Totally agreeable. Totally agreeable. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Obi, because that's totally what's happening. We're still feeling that across Indonesia, where when clubs fill out with bringing international DJs, it's packed, and when the clubs try to do it more experimental and bringing upcoming or bringing local DJs trying to fill out the night, it's pretty tough, and that's what's happening with us. So I would ask that question to Michail as well. From your perspective, what should we do first? Save the scene or save the venue? Because often some venues here that begin with a certain genre or scene has to change because revenue pressure, ticket sales, etc. So there was a pretty good quality club here in Jakarta called Jinja, an underground club, very nice sound system and everything, but it had to change directions due to pressure with the ticket sales and everything, and eventually closed down because of it. So in your opinion, should we try to save the scene or save the venue? Because the scene also needs a venue, but the venue also needs
I mean, ultimately, again, so ideally, you would save the venues that are more than a venue, but a hub for every aspect of the scene. Very often and this is something that I do think is a good, I'm like, there's certain things, blueprints that were created here in Berlin that makes sense, you know, like a venue being a 24/7 hub for culture, which means, at night you can dance, but during the day, community action is happening. Maybe community action that is not related at all to music. You know, it could be activism, it could be neighborhood, you know, things. It could be anything, but nonetheless, that a venue, I would focus on the venues that understand themselves as cultural drivers for the neighborhood, for every single aspect of the social needs of the neighborhood, you know, and even if that means that that venue in the winter opens up, you know, for homeless people, which some venues, you know, in Berlin and in Amsterdam have been doing, you know, because again, I said, underground music is a social and political project first, and then it is an entertainment, you know. So if the venue takes those two things serious, focus on them. But the good thing is, music doesn't need much, especially, you know, in Indonesia, where you're blessed with enough good weather. You know, all you need is a sound system and a field, and then off you fucking go. Pardon for swearing, but ultimately, you know, a lot of venues are just, you know, the music is just a soundtrack to sell beers, you know, which then quite often the venues can only open because they got a credit from the beer company, which is how many venues operate. They get, you know, prepayment from a big beer distributor, and that's, you know, what allows them to do it. So I do not want to discredit the efforts of any venue operator, and I know a couple of people who COVID means now tremendous financial losses and drama because they're now bankrupt, you know, and they might never recover from it financially ever again, you know, which fucking sucks because they're wonderful people. But ultimately, unless the venue, you know, is more than entertainment, focus on saving the scene, because you will need for your community a sound system, a warehouse, a field, and you can create equity, and you can create revenue for everyone, and you will not pay a landlord, you know, which is very often what happened, you know. The money that was, you know, given to the venues, they didn't go to the workers, they went to some corporate landlord. You know, and this is what fucking irks me about that. Even though the loss of a couple of venues can sometimes mean the death of a whole music scene, depending on the context of that music scene. But I have the feeling that in Indonesia, you have many other opportunities, just because there's like enough free space outdoors where you can do shit.
Yes, you can.
Not in Jakarta.
That's what I was about to say. Not in Jakarta, but in other areas. Hopefully, we can do that. But so that's what we really experience here, because of the pressure from the landlords, the pressure from the venue, like the landowners, and also because of support from the brands that push the sustainability of the venues. So it ends up with you know, the pressure to the scene itself. So
but this is again, you know, that's the point where we get into policy, because, and this is quite often, you know, the understanding of many, you know, again, you know, this is maybe something that not a DJ should occupy themselves with, but ultimately you need to think about it also politically, you know, lobbyism, which means that you need, you know,
joining as a collective,
find who are the politicians that might understand that what you do is not just hedonism and taking drugs to awful music, but it's actually way more than that, you know. And this is, again, you know, if you committed your life to that, and you committed your life to more than just, you know, playing loud music for fucked up people, then you'll be able to create, you know, the what's called the examples of where what you do benefits the community, benefits society, and is for politicians a good thing to be associated with.
Connecting with that, with the point of saving or surviving as a community, we also have a question from Kaizen or Brixita. She runs a banging party series here called Distinct Rhythm from Jakarta, currently running a radio show, a program on internet public radio. They only promote their work through Mixcloud, no Instagram page. What would you suggest them? Should they do more to save their party series with the current situation, or just in general?
I mean, ultimately, you know, electronic music, I mean, there's plenty of music communities that have no visibility outside of their circle, you know, like the French free techno scene, you know, this is all very underground, you know, happens outside of Instagram, outside of any visibility, because they don't want to be found, because the moment they step into Instagram, the police, you know, can find them as well. So it's ultimately, you know, what is your goal? Is your goal to reach a maximum audience possible outside of the people that you think is your audience currently? Then you need to do more, because unless, you know, you tell your story, you know, why is what we do better than what somebody else is doing, you know, what's the story and motivation behind it, you know, because people, like audiences and people, are incredibly lazy, you know, this is the worst fucking thing. Internet has ruined our attention span. Nobody has more time to spare than reading 3 hashtags, you know. So that's ultimately the reality of it, and it's a sad fucking reality, you know. I know it even by the listening figures, you know, of you know, like I listen to much long, you know, like the amount of time I spend to listen to a set is longer than 98% of people, you know, who visit Boiler Room, for example. You know, I just have the numbers to prove that. But ultimately, it's the question, you know, what's your goal? You want to become famous? Then you have to play the game, you know, and you have to think about how do you position yourself. Are you happy with that the right people understand what you do? Then maybe be just proactive to reach out to those people individually, you know, doing it in a very traditional old PR style of way. You know, it's really depending on how do you want to scale things. But to be honest, just be present on one platform with delivering very little context. Then again, you expose yourself to the algorithm. You know, you have no control over whether the Mixcloud algorithm will recommend your stuff or not, you know, because you don't have any control over that algorithm. So you do need to create more points that you control, else other people decide about your fate.
Gita, do you have any thoughts regarding that?
Your microphone is switched off.
Unmute. Now, I think there's maybe some technical issues.
Maybe write your question in the chat room, and then Hendy can read it.
Yeah, if you want to write the question in the chat room, and then maybe you guys can comment on it. But yeah, I totally agree with what Michail said. I mean, it depends on what's your end goal. If you want to keep it within just your inner small circle, or if you're happy with that, you can keep it with that. But if you want to go big, you have to play the game, you know. But question? What was the question? Okay, so Brixita says she's happy with the answer. I think we can go on. But I'm hopefully Michail's point of view could help you and your distinct rhythm party series. So maybe one last question for this segment. So Michail, according to your experience, what would be a small thing that we can all do as an electronic music industry that can support the party scene right now, locally and also globally?
Share infrastructure. The thing is, competition is a capitalist mindset. You know what I mean? One of the things that I do appreciate about Berlin, even though this is, you know, not, Berlin isn't, you know, like most ideal place, but it is quite idealistic. You know, many people who come into my radio show, for example, or, you know, artists that I speak with, is that it's super easy in Berlin, you know, to find support from other people just because, you know, that people share their studio, share their, you know, platforms, whatever. They're supportive of each other because the success of, you know, if more people around you are successful, then everybody benefits from the growth that comes with it.
It becomes an ecosystem,
yeah. If you are the only, because the thing is ultimately, you know, no one can be, you know, the most successful. There's always going to be people who are just as successful. So the more people, you know, are successful, the better for everyone, which means that create connections and share infrastructure. And sharing infrastructure means sharing other people's work, pointing out excellence, you know, be proactive about, you know, if you think that something, you know, someone else is doing is, you know, maybe it might not be the 100%, you know, the thing that you love, but nonetheless, you should need to show appreciation. You know, I share sometimes also music, you know, that I'm not 100% fan of, but I do appreciate for what it is. And I want the people to succeed because I want other people in their network to succeed, you know. So I share techno sets that I might, you know, it's not my style of techno, but nonetheless I believe in the people, you know, even I listen to something completely different at home. So if we amongst each other, and we, I mean, you know, underground music culture activists don't support each other, how can we expect that others will? And if you multiply, you know, if you multiply the network, you multiply the visibility for everyone. So if you have a studio, make sure that other people have access to the studio. If you run an online radio station, make sure that it's accessible to other people than just your, you know, your crew. You know, if you have a DJ setup and there's no community radio station in your community, then maybe it's your turn, you know, to share. So that is the single most important advice that I could ever give, because I sometimes come into cities where you have 4 clubs and 8 conflicts, you know, and then everybody is surprised why no one is moving forward, you know, because people are just not accepting of the fact that the pie is big enough for everyone, you know, and we need to make sure that we get as many people at the table to share it.
That's why,
you know, like it's ridiculous that this is my advice, but ultimately this is what I see wrong. You know, I'm a lot on Instagram, you know, I follow thousands of people, and the amount of artists that actually communicate about other people's work as much as they do about themselves is surprisingly low, and I find that really weird.
That's why. So by doing this talk show as well, that's what our goal is. You know, like like what I say is like collab or collapse. You know, because like everybody just has to just try to collab and share, like you said, share infrastructure, connect with one another. That's why we're doing this from all over Indonesia. So hopefully your tips regarding like sharing everything to support us, because if we don't support each other, who will, right? So
and there are, you know, really good examples of that. So one crew that I love that does that is from Berlin, No Shade. It's a femme collective, you know, focusing on queer and non-binary people that basically created an infrastructure to give access to music education with focus on DJing to, you know, the kind of individuals that usually fall out of the circles having access to that, you know, because DJ schools and music schools and DJ stuff is usually catered to like kind of bro-y dudes. So they decided, you know, we're gonna do something exclusively for, you know, the queer and non-binary community. And some of the most successful DJs in Berlin came out of this community effort. You know, they are now like, the world looks at some of these, you know, people just because they saw potential, and they made sure that they amplify each other. They make sure they're visible, you know, and then it started to go beyond the circle. Another more professional initiative is She Said So, which was basically an initiative started by a few women in the music industry that said, you know, we're gonna focus to build a network that amplifies female voices within the music industry to make sure that, you know, that we are heard, that we have a community, that we, you know, can amplify excellence. And now it's one of the most important professional networks worldwide within the music industry with tremendous reach, which means, you know, the same stuff needs to happen on a local level as well, you know, getting together, making, you know, the idea of a union is as important for music producers as it is for steel factory workers.
Yeah. Stronger together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Very nice. Good topics from the previous segment. I just want to introduce you. We just had Mayo. That's one of our co-founders as well from Tripo 2000 joining us. So,
Hey, Mayo.
Yep. And so lastly, after we've planned how to survive and how to save, finally, we must also like try to thrive and sustain. So in terms of sustain, I appreciate one of the goals for Boiler Room is to provide access to electronic music and club culture to parts where, you know, there's little access. Truth to be told, it's very much relatable to us here in Indonesia, where we have religion-centric government, rules, regulations, electronic music, and club culture in general is they still have the stigma of just being negative. That's why there's an interesting point from Dino. We have a participant here, also resident DJ from Cubic, Yogyakarta. You've been there. Just like we discussed earlier, the regulations there are pretty strict and religious-centric. Have you ever been, Michail, to a country similar to ours in terms of this religious barriers to the party or clubbing scene? And how are they coping it over there? And how are they getting the support from the local people?
Man, this is really heavy question because no, it is because ultimately, you know, you know, we do live in very strange times where, you know, we can travel to Mars, but our ideologies become so regressive that they would have even been perceived off in the 17th century. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is the weird fucking time, and here it's very hard to give advice because some of this operates not by the rule of law. You know, what is the societal consensus within the scope of, you know, the societal contract that we all have, you know, which is, you know, this relationship between the state and, you know, the electorate or the society, but it functions on ideological and moral principles. And in return, some of those ideological and moral principles disregard the well-being of others. So, you know, telling you, you know, I unfortunately forgot his name, but I met in Yogyakarta a wonderful young man who invited me to play spontaneously a party in this wonderful like bar kind of outdoor space. And he told me that they did a few weeks before that an open air party, you know, and by a waterfall, and all of a sudden, you know, they were surrounded by Islamists with swords.
Correctly. Yeah.
You know, and what kind of advice can I give you to deal with it? Because this shit's fucked up, you know. Those people don't care for, you know, they don't care for what the law. I'm pretty sure that the Indonesian law does not
approve
involve
that.
vigilante swords. People, you know, that basically threaten to hack your sound system into pieces because they disagree with your expression of freedom. So, you know, like even thinking about that gives me anxiety, you know. So, it's fucking tough. I mean, I've been lucky, you know. one of the countries that we've been, operating in or done stuff with is, for example, Uganda, East African country, which, due to its colonial past, has some of the most restrictive anti-gay legislation in the world. The way the government, like the way, like it's forbidden, to be gay. Absolutely fucking forbidden. And the only way, the queer community can survive is that everyone in the community makes sure not to let anyone from the outside in, and if they are present, to trick them as much as they can. For example, at one party I know, at least that's how I was told, that they make sure that like with every male couple that dances because they're in love or they want to express themselves, there are a couple of women nearby, so nobody can say, oh, just like dudes dancing with each other. No, it's like we know what those policemen are looking for, so we make sure we trick them. This is a playful way to go around it, but again, it's very hard for me to give you any advice, because ultimately in some areas of Indonesia, trying to do what you're trying to do means that you endanger your life, yourself, and maybe more than that. And this is something that can ultimately, I think, only be decided in the voting booth, which is, again, underground music is a political space first, which means that these things, this is a very good example is Georgia. Some of you might know Georgia is a Caucasian country, which means it's perched right between Turkey and Russia, and Tbilisi is one of the cities that has some of the most amazing clubs in the world, better than in Berlin. Like, if you ever can go to Tbilisi, do it. The parties there are banging. And the government, thought that, to get some political gains, to say we are doing something against drug crime, they did a raid on some of the clubs and shut them down, not realizing that the clubs were actually the gathering ground for one of the biggest political youth movements in the country. So they thought they shut down clubs, but the next day they had 150,000 young people on the street demanding the head of the prime minister and changes to the law, which they actually to a certain degree achieved. So again, and it's dangerous because criminalization, is I know club organizers, they've sat in prison, but ultimately electronic music is a political project. So if you think about party, you do think about who's the politician you need to win over to be able to party.
Dino, would you like to add something to that? Because obviously it's very relatable to Yogyakarta, and with all that sword, part militia, disturbing your parties over there. Would you like to add something, Dino? Well, I think, I think Dino.
Yeah, he's on Instagram. He doesn't hear us.
Yeah, because I totally agree that what you said, Michail, because like I think restricting our music culture due to different point of views, including religion, could be seen as intolerance and just like inequality. So in relation with that, from what you might have seen in countries like ours, what do people usually do without noticing that actually promotes intolerance and inequality? How should we start to be more inclusive, especially like a country like ours, which is a very religion-centric country?
But ultimately, and this is the thing, understand music culture as community activism. If you do something that gets families interested, that involves children, that has a social element, no one ultimately, unless, their ideology is completely against it because they are fundamentalists, no matter Christian fundamentalists, Islamist fundamentalists, where they just say any expression of freedom is against our, you know, moral code, then this is of course really hard, which is why, you know, there are no raves in Taliban controlled, you know, or Amish controlled, you know, countries or areas. But ultimately, you know, if you show to the community that you care more about than hedonism, and this is a really important, you know, this is a really important job, then even, you know, people who don't understand what you do, but they see those are young people who genuinely care to better our environment, you will succeed. Because, and this is the thing, you know, we have in Germany or in Europe in general a huge issue with the far right, you know, like far right movements are coming up all across Europe. And those motherfuckers, they are doing this, you know, they are organizing, you know, the summer solstice celebrations with child care, you know, they are organizing stuff that looks after, you know, the old people. So, you know, I see a raging racist and homophobe, but some old grandmother who has no context for that sees a nice young man who, you know, takes care of her shopping, you know. And what I'm just trying to say is that, especially in places where the freedom to party, you know, is a political question, you do have to create political answers to that, which means you have to win people over who might not understand what you do, but will appreciate the things that you do on top of it, you know. So they might not like your music, but they know that you actually care about, you know, doing community, like stuff for the community, so they will be on your side even if they hate your music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, I do again, you know, those are blueprints that make sense in Europe, you know. I cannot speak, you know, I've not organized a community rally in Jakarta, so maybe all of the things that I'm saying right now is complete fucking bullshit. So but this is from my experience, you know, how I would approach it.
Yeah. Dino, I think you just joined back. Do you want to add something to that? Because it was related with the situation over there in Yogyakarta.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Is it for you?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh yeah. Hi, good evening, everyone. No, I think I heard most of the issues. Like maybe it's commonly happen in religious countries like in Indonesia. But yeah, in Yogyakarta, I think, and then some people here, some community decide to make something like camouflage. There are times that some psychedelic trance community, they make event called Samadhi. They label the event as a Indian and Japanese culture appreciation night, and then they just made the party in the forest. It lasts like 2 or 3 days, but no religious religious organization or local people, what is it? Like they just let the party go because they already have the government, what is it? Government permit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like, and then most of our even our party here that happened in outdoor. Finally, I like, what is it? Cat and mouse. So like hide and seek with those organizations.
Yeah.
I'm just telling the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, totally. Because like I'm just trying to recap what also Dino said, and I think the other participants are also adding here as well. Like the cultural background and then the religious background, everything is very heavily centric up here. And so like Michail just said, we have to combine as a collective, try to find ways to connect and then also maybe bring that down to the government, just try to show them that, you know, the underground music culture, all the electronic music culture as a whole, brings value, right, Michail? Brings value to the community, brings value to the cities, not just like, you know, this is just like a drug heavily you know, event, right?
And this is, I mean, ultimately, this is, you know, I personally don't police anyone's way to express themselves. I, for example, don't drink and don't do drugs, you know, so this is completely not an element of my involvement with electronic music. But it's really, really important that, you know, if you have a, you know, opposition from the establishment, that you try to utilize the language and the forms of expression the establishment might appreciate, even if it waters down a little bit what you're on about, you know, like, I'm not a big fan of, you know, techno artists playing with orchestras, but techno artists playing with orchestras, you know, probably helped more to win over, you know, people that decide over cultural budgets in government institutions than techno without an orchestra. You know what I mean? So looking at, you know, what are, you know, where can you inject yourself and do something that those, you know, decision makers might understand, you know, that widens the window, you know, of what is possible, you know, to say and to do will help you. So think as an activist. Don't think as a party organizer. Think as an activist.
Okay. Well, I hope that answers your question, yeah, Dino.
I get a point.
Continue on. So we have also several questions coming up within this sustained topic regarding performer and connection to the crowd. Harsha, a selector from Jakarta, and also Dimas, a producer all the way from Cologne, joining us today, are asking about how can they still express themselves musically and connect with the non-existent crowd? Because they also asked about digitalization itself. Will it improve the way we appreciate art while having no crowd in front of us? So, yeah. Michail, do you think there is a way that we can establish a connection to the audience, or maybe even strengthen or create a new way of connecting while there is no crowd actually in front of the performers, right? I mean, like yourself as a DJ, most of the participants here also DJs, producers, and performers and whatnot. We used to be able to feed from the energy, right? When we are playing, and then we perform, or we give the feedback towards that. But now, without crowds or without an audience in front of you, I think from my point of view, it's kind of a one-way instead of a two-way interaction. What's your point of view regarding that, Michail? Is there a connection that can be made with this non-existent crowd?
I mean, again, you know, replacing the thrill of performing in front of a sold-out venue cannot be reproduced online. You know, like, I will not lie, you know, I've played broadcasts myself, and I've played big shows myself online, and playing to 30 punks in a squat in the middle of fuck nowhere is more exciting than that. Like, that's just, you know, so you cannot reproduce that, and unfortunately this is the limitation that we're facing right now, where there are no new strategies. But
if you think about, I mean, who are the people that you actually genuinely interact with after a gig, you know, as a DJ? Yeah, you might play, you know, to 1,000 people, and again, you know, over the last 10 years we learned that this is the blueprint, you know, maximum exposure, the biggest audience possible, not 30 visitors but 3,000, you know, and every view is as if there would be somebody in the audience. But it's not the way. Think about, you know, what is like after a gig, the amount of people that you can interact with. After a gig, you maybe talk to 5 people, to 10 people. With maybe 3 of them, you stay in touch after the gig, you know? So the most important thing right now is to build. And again, you know, when I said earlier, you know, focus, build your own ecosystem, you know, equity models that keep things within your community that is the same. It's the same thing when it comes to the interaction with audiences. You might not become a superstar DJ anytime soon, but if you are doing something right, which means you're a good DJ, you know, you have a music or an artist, you know, that does something that's exceptional, and you build a small community of engaged people around you, the exchange you'll have will be as rich and as thankful of an experience as anything else. And I've seen it with some musicians. So my friend Machine Drum, he's like a bass music footwork producer. He is now slowly disengaging from many social media platforms, despite having been around for 20 years as a musician, despite about to release a new album on Ninja Tune, one of the biggest electronic music labels there is. He is shifting to his own Discord channel because he rather talks to 100 engaged fans than shouting into the ether to an audience of no one or 1,000 people. We don't know because the algorithm doesn't show us really what's happening. So focus on the, you know, again, this doesn't answer the financial uncertainty. It does not answer, you know, the question, how will I get the endorphin of dropping a tune in the right moment to the right audience and everybody's hands go up into the air and you feel like this is the most important thing that has ever happened. We can't reproduce that, but to build other ways of engaging on a human level that is as relevant as that, that's fairly easy. So rather focus on 20 people than hoping to reach 2,000.
Yeah, agreeable, totally agreeable with that. And like you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily answer about the financial part of it, but
because there are no blueprints for that yet.
Yeah, but that's what is also what we would like to know as well, because from your experience at CTM Festival, how is it that you guys are able to sustain the festival to be a festival driven by content before ticket sales? How do you guys able to afford it, afford everything? Because most of the festivals here are very heavily influenced by ticket sales and sponsors that push certain content to be on the lineup. Like we got questions from Mas Guna and Naren here from Jakarta, just asking tips on how to actually settle between the middle ground of getting a sponsor or how you guys actually finance like CTM without, you know, compromising the content. So because that's something that's really, really relatable here, that like I mentioned before, the festivals here, all the big events here are very, very highly influenced by, you know, the funding side of it, which at the end of the day, influence the content.
Yeah. You know, CTM is not a good example because at CTM, no, it's not, unfortunately. You know, I wish the world would be such a beautiful place that any city, you know, with the right amount of motivation could reproduce what the CTM team has built. But, you know, Berlin has a high concentration of venues that are relatively cheap compared to the rest of the world in terms of operations and accessibility. It has a really high amount of audience that's interested in seeing things that are not mainstream, which allows you, you know, just to think different about programming. Berlin and Europe in particular has a very well developed funding infrastructure for liberal arts, you know, even though that slowly changes. You know, the more far-right governments there are, the less money there is for, you know, this kind of music and art. So the only and plus, you know, because Berlin is a fairly cheap place to live, you know, people can do things longer just because and not because they have to make money, you know. Berlin is still to a point a place where you can decide to live a certain way, even if that means you don't make too much money, but you know, you will not end up on the street, you know, because you made that decision, even though that's changing as well. So CTM is exceptional just because, you know, there's funding from institutions, there's venues that want to support things like that, and there are audiences that are willing to pay for the experience, which is, frankly speaking, the most ideal scenario. The most ideal scenario for that. But again, you know, if you do the things that we've discussed earlier, which is, you know, make sure that you amplify excellence within your community, you know, that you educate the audiences that what they have to look up to is not, you know, unattainable success abroad, or, you know, artists, you know, that do things that make sense, you know, there, but not in your local community. You'll be able to grow your own platform and the platform of your, you know, the musicians around you, and ultimately the festival. It's a big challenge, but, you know, to produce the success that we have here is impossible because we have completely under two different tools to work with.
Yep.
But again, some of the best, you know, festivals that I know, let's say TP Creepy, you know, which is a festival that started out as a goth festival, then kind of became post-punk, then did a lot of, you know, witch house, and now is kind of gathering ground between post-internet, extreme, you know, electronic music and punk. They have built a festival based on a really tight-knit community that would make sure to work towards a goal of having a showcase for the weird shit they're into.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, like on the other side as well, we're talking about content. Yeah. Like we're glad about for you helping in supporting some of our local scenes, such as like you mentioned, Gabber Modus Operandi to be heard globally. I understand you reached out to them, bringing them out to play at CTM last year. So still talking about that, our dear friend Hogi, co-founder also of a good collective here, Future 10 in Jakarta, and also Hilmo, a producer from Malang, Baba from Tantra. They're also curious about how do you do your curation process? How do you find and select new artists and music from your point of view?
I mean, ultimately, you know, you're giving CTM and me way too much respect or credit, because none of this would have happened without, for example, people like Vok, you know, who probably anyone in Jakarta or in Indonesia knows, who's been, you know, committing his life since I don't know how many decades to do that, building a platform for local talent and making sure that people hear about it. It's his work, you know. We were lucky enough to discover it and, you know, be able to participate and then do our part, you know, to amplify it. But without the work of somebody like him, none of this would have happened, you know. So even though, you know, yes, we had them play our stage, the work that was needed to be done was done locally, you know. We've just provided another platform. So yes, No Wave, by the way, is like, you can learn so much from what especially Vok has been doing, because he's been doing, when it comes to underground music activism, everything right. And he has an insane I'm still not through listening to everything they ever released, but I've so far have not heard much that I didn't like on the label, you know. So that's one thing. And again, you know, for CTM, this is also really, really important that we understand the festival as a platform, understand our infrastructure as a privilege, and we make sure that we give access to all of it, you know, which is when, you know, you see something like this happen, we figure out what needs to be done that all those wonderful musicians can participate and profit from it, you know, not because, you know, we want to be like, oh, look at CTM, you know, we find the weirdest shit in Indonesia. No, 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 no. That is colonialism, you know. No, it's about, you know, thinking like, how can we take the stuff that we think, like, we basically have exclusive access to, and just redistribute it amongst as many people as possible. You know, where's the excellence within our community, and how can we amplify that excellence? You know, and so in my personal, you know, my personal style of curation is I just, you know, again, you know, I follow a lot of people. I look to up to like people who I, you know, trust. You know, I dig into what they are into, and when I find something through that, I also make sure to include them, because again, you know, I didn't do the work. You know, I've been only a bystander on Instagram. You know, so how can I, you know, make sure to pay my credit, you know, like to pay my respect to the work that others have done as amplifiers, as curators themselves. So this is the way I think I operate.
Hogi, would you like to add something regarding that? What's your thoughts?
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Hogi.
Hello, Mike. So, actually, this is a funny story. I actually got in contact with Boiler Room, maybe before you were a part of it, but a long time ago. I asked Boiler Room to do a thing for our festival in Bali. This is like, I don't know, 6 years ago or something. But anyway, I got shot down. They said that my curation was not good. And then, but that actually motivated me to start my own thing, which is actually really good. Yeah.
Fuck the Westerners. Do your own thing.
No, it's good. But I'm curious how many demos do you get in, like, you know, in your operation? I mean, you must get like a crazy amount of demos.
So my promo folder at the moment is at 6,000 unread emails, and that's just since, because, you know, since March, and I will not lie, you know, Corona also fucked with me massively, so I wasn't as diligent when it came to my job. So I think, like, since I get hundreds of demos, promos, artists reaching out a week. It's impossible for me, you know, between my own taste in music, between trying to be as polite as possible to everyone who reaches out, and my responsibility to stay on top of things, you know, to fulfill that. And by the way, I'm incredibly sorry to hear that you had this experience. Frankly speaking, the very first show that Boiler Room has done on Bali is shameful, and I have not been involved with it, you know, at all, because I've been also running my own office in Berlin, which was doing other, you know, different things. So, you know, as idealistic I might sound, we did have, you know, people in the team who might have been incredibly arrogant and fucking shitty, and I hope none of the people still works there.
No, I mean, in a way, that was good for me, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have not started our own thing, you know, which is 4 years on, and we kind of, you know, we did our first, like, digital festival recently. And I mean, this is 25 years in of our career here. So it's like, my mission in life here is to promote Indonesian music. And then, like, so what you guys do, is amazing. And like, that pushes us here forward to do other things, you know, like, so actually, I don't know, this is partly for everyone else too, like, a bit of let down and shot down is actually good for your morale, because then otherwise you wouldn't start doing your own things.
Motivation.
But the thing is, you know, and this is again, you know, we've been conditioned by capitalism that failure is negative, that not succeeding is a fault. It's not. You know, I live by the idea that, you know, the successes, like the highs of the past, need to be the lows of the future, which means that whatever you do, you know, it's a chance for improvement. You know, if you failed, it does not mean that you're not good at what you do. It means that this did not work out and it should be a chance. And this is the thing, you know, because you don't get the acknowledgement from external sources like Western media companies, does not discredit and make what you do any less relevant. It probably speaks more about their lack of understanding for what is actually, you know, good. So again, unlearn those toxic patterns of success being, you know, this kind of success being a measure of your worth. It's not. Failure is potential, and not still stand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, like, I totally agree with that because, you know, with all the problems that we occur, or all the rejections that we might, you know, encounter, we should use that as a motivation. And I'm very happy that everyone here is enthusiastic with, well, the main problem right now is COVID, right? So from there, we should find, you know, new ideas and new ways to succeed going forward. So great insight on that, you know.
And there's so another story, you know, like so I'm Russian, you know, not that I have much what's called sentimental feelings for my heritage, because frankly speaking, you know, I largely disagree with pretty much everything that Russia stands for politically. But you know, Russia has always had, you know, big interest in electronic music. The community there was growing, you know, with lots of clubs and platforms appearing. But, you know, they were making the mistake that they would fill that space with Western talent, you know, like the DJs would come in and play and headline and get the fees, and, you know, local talent would be support, but would never get invited back to Europe. You know, do you think any of the DJs would invite any Russians, you know, back to their parties? Will never happen, you know. And then 2014, the currency collapsed, lost like 60-70% of the value, which means that no one had money to fly in foreign talent. And that was the best thing that could happen to the Russian electronic music community, because they had to fill the spaces with their own talent. All of a sudden they had to fill the spaces, and they filled them with their own talent. And now Russia has one of the most exciting electronic music scenes worldwide, because it offered room for experimentation, for local, you know, tastes. You know, Russia has a community, like in Russia there are like still communities that don't exist in other countries, because audiences, you know, might not be up for it. But Russians still love Witch House, you know, Russians still love IDM, you know, they still love hardcore drum and bass, you know, and that creates opportunities. So, you know, locking yourself off from that, either for fine, you know, because that's just what, you know, you can't pay anyone to come from abroad, or make that a conscious decision, basically enables creativity, because you're much closer to what actually the kids around you want. And at some point the kids will unlearn as well. They will not want, you know, to see Nina Kravitz. They want to see, I'm not sure if she's still there, Myra instead, you know.
Yeah. Great insight on that. And surprisingly, we've come to 2 hours of our very, very good topics and discussions. So we've come to the end of the final segment. Lots of questions answered and very good topic discussed. So lastly, this one is from almost everyone here today, and also pretty much from everyone that we've talked to offline as well. So maybe this might be our last question for you, Michail. From your experience, arranging parties in more than 250 cities around the world. What would be your advice for music communities in countries like us, Indonesia, on how to strive and emerge to the global scene?
Yeah. The
Tough one.
No, it's not a tough one. It's a really easy one. It's a really easy one. Is if you build your local infrastructure, your local community, then they will come. You know, because the thing is, the moment something is, you know, cool, then the platforms, the journalists, the attention, you know, will come. Which means that rather than hoping, you know, to make it internationally, focus on making it in your community, building your own community, making it relevant, because then no one can fuck with it, and you'll come with the full weight of because ultimately, you know, and this is how it works. The moment, you know, DJs, artists, labels, promoters realize that there's something happening that they can't get in on, then they're gonna get jealous and do everything to get in on. You know, if all of a sudden there's like a music community that is exciting and operates without the help or the presence of any, you know, techno DJ from Berlin, 100% techno DJs from Berlin will do anything to get in on your stuff. You know what I mean? So just focus on yourself, like build connections, you know. Culture exchange is important, you know. Collaboration is important, you know. Like combining, you know, I really love when things, you know, when we had that CTM Festival, again, Gabba Modus Operandi play at Berghain with a traditional xylophone group out of the north of Uganda. Sounds like something, you know, like a joke someone made up. It was one of the most radical things I've ever seen, you know. Interact, collaborate, but build local infrastructure, build local economy, you know, because that is what will allow you to amplify what you do into the world when you need it, you know. And this is the big chance that we have right now. We can't travel, you know, no one can come from abroad and take away the opportunities that might exist right now. So make sure you use the opportunities for yourself, you know, rather than gifting them to someone who, frankly speaking, only cares for the fee they're gonna take home.
Yeah, totally agree upon that. Well, thanks, Michail, for all the point of view, which I'm sure opens up our mindset and gives us new point of views on how to do things better and hopefully more inclusive and appreciative here. So also shout out to all the participants across Indonesia. Real great questions and interesting thoughts from all the artists, communities, management, everybody here joining us today. Glad to see everyone is very still optimistic, still eager to fight together to deal with this Corona situation. And we should definitely collab, like Michail said, collab or collapse, that's what I say. So let's have a quick online photo together, for everyone here. And then I will, we will send the photo email to all the participants here today, just as a souvenir together with us. This is the collaboration worldwide. So very happy. We got like 4 countries here joining us today. So, you know.
Everyone look cute.
Got it?
Wonderful.
Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I mentioned to Michail earlier, I said, Michail, I hope you had your lunch because I'm planning to do this maybe 1 hour, 1.5 hours, but surprisingly, we ended up doing it for 2 hours and very interactive. I hope everybody from all the comments that I read here is very happy with all the discussion. And they even say like, hopefully to have another discussion soon. Okay.
I mean, if anyone has individual questions, you know, of course my time is a little bit limited because I'm also looking, you know, need to work and make some money, but you can always hit me up on my Instagram and I might be able, you know, to send you a voice message with some feedback on, you know, our questions. So and this is the most important thing, don't be afraid to reach out to people that you think can teach you anything, something. Most of them will be willing to share knowledge, like genuinely, you know, like just do it, like raise their attention, you know, be nice about it, and people will get back to you that might, you know, you perceive leagues above you because of success or in the know-how. But there's so many people that I know that love, you know, to help young artists, you know, grow. So just reach out, and if you happen to think that I can help you, holler at me, and I'll try to my best to answer your questions.
Yep. Well, thank you once again, Michail, for your time, your thoughts, and 2 words today, and we'll definitely learn from it to continue to survive, save, and sustain within our electronic music culture here, and just try to make Indonesia a nicer place one step at a time. And I will, like I said, I will email everyone the photo that we had together, and then like Michail said, shout out to him via Instagram, and then that's what we did. I connected with Michail, and thank you very much for your support, for doing this talk show with us. I hope everyone here also from Indonesia all around is very much appreciative towards it as well. Yep.
Cool. Peace out. Have a wonderful Sunday and Saturday evening. And we'll see you hopefully.
Thank you.
Okay, my team is happy now. Michail, I'm very happy. Thank you very much. And hopefully everyone here have a good weekend. And we'll talk to you soon again, hopefully.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Terima kasih.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michail.